How's everyone? Oh, there I am. How's everyone doing? It's so good to see you all on this last Sunday of Advent, and we get to talk about love. We get to think about love. This is beautiful and wonderful. But I look out over these faces, and I know we're not all coming at this from the same place. We're going through as many different experiences as there are people in this room. We're all coming at it from different places. So before I begin, I'm going to give you the punchline up front. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you so that you can decide if you need to listen or not. Or you can decide, kind of figure out from what perspective you want to listen. Because I know that there are those of us who are literally lit up with joy like a Christmas tree because we are so excited that it's Christmas. And we just love this time of year and we're just reveling in it. And there are those of us who struggle at this time of year, who feel the weight of grief, of longing for loved ones who have passed on. There are those of us who are going through hard times. Maybe we're feeling fear about our own future. Maybe we're feeling discouraged by all the difficulties in our life. So we're all coming from a different place. So what I'm going to tell you about today, about love, I think it's relevant for all of those places. Wherever you find yourself, this message that comes from God to us about love, it's relevant for you right where you are. So first I'm going to tell you about what love being born into the world looks like. And kind of what love looks like when it's born, and maybe also, because I like to look at the opposite sides of things, what it looks like when we kill love. What love looks like when it dies. And then after that, I'm going to also tell you about why that matters and what is your responsibility. Why does it matter that you know what love looks like? Because what is your responsibility regarding the birth of love in our world right now in 2022? Not just back in Bethlehem, but right here in Halifax. So let's begin. John chapter 15, verses 12 to 17. This was my assigned passage. And so what I had to do is I had to weave together the Christmas story, Jesus lying in the manger, and this passage about God calling us his friends, and love. These three things all had to get woven together. So here we are, the passage. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. I think it's interesting. Let's look at verse 14 where it says, you are my friends if you do what I command. This sounds like a really bad friend. When you're in elementary school and you have that friend and she's like, you can be my friend, but only if we play what I want to play. And that's not what Jesus means here. So I wanted to just take a quick look at that. When he says, you are my friends if you do what I command, he has just given them a command just before that. So you go back like 2 verses and it says, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Okay, you are my friends if you love each other as I have loved you. That sounds better, doesn't it? So being the friend of God, it's all tied up in loving each other. Why? What is it about loving each other that makes us the friend of God? First of all, what is a friend? And is it better than being just a creation, just, someone who worships God? Is it better to be God's friend? I think so. As the mother of 3 adult daughters, let me just say that this phase of motherhood, it's way better than anyone led me to believe. When my daughters, and they were really cute when they were little, 3 little blonde heads, and when we would go to the mall, people would stop us and be like, oh, they're so cute. And everyone would always say to me, enjoy this. It goes by so quick. So I had this idea that, they were only fun or they were only going to be great and enjoyable while they were little. And I had no idea of this coming gift of adult daughters, of adult children. My children have grown from being utterly dependent on me into these amazing people with thoughts and ideas and feelings all of their own, and lots of opinions too. But they've become my friends, in that our relationship goes two ways. Being a friend means sharing joys and sorrows. As they get older, my daughters come to know my struggles and my hurts, and they join with me in acknowledging the ways that this world pushes up against my wounds. Of course, I know their wounds, and I feel every hurt that I'm aware of. But this other direction, this caring and sharing and worrying about me that happens on their part, this is the work of friends. The dictionary defines a friend as a person whom one knows and with whom one has a bond of mutual affection. It goes two ways, it's mutual. God here is calling us friends. He's saying, I want you to be my friend. I want us to be in a two-way relationship, not just one way. A good friend will feel hurt by what hurts me. And a good friend will not only laugh with me in times of joy, but they will cry with me in seasons of grief. What Jesus is suggesting here is that we enter into a deeper level of love with God than was ever possible before. We become not just his creation, but his friends. This means we share his joy and his pain. Ouch. Do you know what it's like to feel the pain of God? To hurt like God hurts? To hear the cries of God's creation is to cry the tears of God. To feel the grief of God over the hurts of his children is to learn to love like God loves. At this time of year, we think about baby Jesus lying in a manger, the literal birth of love in this world. And it makes me wonder about what kind of love might be being birthed in our world today. And if it is, who would we be in the story? Maybe we would be like the wise men who watched for love, and they watched the stars and they followed and they sought out the birth of love himself. Or maybe we'd be like King Herod, who tried to kill love. Or maybe we'd simply be unaware of the birth, like the townspeople of Bethlehem. But maybe we can be like Mary, who labored to bring love into the world. One of the universal truths of childbirth is the accompanying pain for the mother. She might cry out as she endures pain that is unrivaled, her body literally breaking as she pushes new life into the world. We don't like to talk about that. Collectively and individually, we like to think about the positive, happy things. But that doesn't take away the fact that pain is a part of life. It is very likely that Mary cried out in pain into the still dark night of Bethlehem as Jesus was born. We often minimize the humanity of Jesus, thinking instead of a serene and reverent birth, complete with choirs of angels singing. But if we believe that Jesus is fully God and fully human, then we have to acknowledge that his human birth was accompanied by pain. Every year, I love to spend Advent thinking about all the beautiful and majestic elements of the Christmas story. I've always loved to imagine the stillness of the night sky as the shepherds sat with their flocks. And because I grew up in Nova Scotia, I always imagined that night as a cold, crisp winter night. There's nothing like a cold winter night when the landscape is covered with a blanket of snow. There's a hush in the air and fresh hope on the wind. You know what I'm talking about, a Nova Scotia winter night. But I know the story didn't take place in Nova Scotia. It took place in Bethlehem. But that's what it means to take artistic license. It means we put ourselves right inside of the story. And it means we put Jesus right inside of our own story. So if we're looking for love being born in our world, if we want to make ourselves into love doulas, attending and aiding as love pushes excruciatingly into our world, we need to be able to look pain in the face. I bet you didn't see this coming. Oh, Joanne's going to talk about love, and somehow she's going to end up talking about pain. Sorry, I do tend to do that. We need to be able to comfort the hurting, though. We need to listen to their cries for help and hold their hand, calling out encouraging words as love comes. Like the birth of Jesus, love's birth seems ordinary, common even. It slips in without fanfare or grandiosity, and to those who aren't watching, we might just miss it. We might even mistake it for evil and attempt to kill it. For we are flesh and bones like Herod. We are pride and ego, filled with fear of losing control. But what does love look like, you might ask? What would it look like if love came and we missed it? Or worse, if it came and we killed it? I'm going to give you an example, but I apologize in advance for the stark ugliness of this story. It hurts my heart just to think of it, but I honestly can't describe the death of love without telling an ugly story. Recently, I was listening to a podcast. I really do have a little bit of a podcast addiction, and my favorite genres are history and faith. And so on this particular day, I was listening to a history podcast, and the historian that was speaking, she brought up a part of our history that I actually didn't know about. She told of a practice of something called vivisection. It was practiced in the 1800s, and it involved the dissection of living mammals. In the sad story she shared, it was a dog that was tied to the table and without anesthesia was cut open, having its organs removed and examined. The term vivisection these days has come to refer to experimentation on animals in general, but this particular practice in the 1800s was incredibly cruel, and it caught my attention and it broke my heart. Because the common belief in that day was that animals didn't feel pain. It was that they didn't feel pain the way we do. And there's still some debate around this issue, but thankfully, in the 1800s, eventually, some people listened to the cries of anguish and hurt of the animals that were lying on those tables. And they rallied around them and they created societies for the abolition of this practice. But it makes you wonder, for all the experiments that did happen, and there were thousands of them, what did the doctors or the scientists think? How did they not respond to the cries of hurt as these experiments lasted for hours or even days? How did they not respond to those cries of hurt? And I can only conclude one thing. They had a well-established belief that animals didn't feel pain. And that belief made them deaf to the cries of anguish. This is a sobering thought. Is it possible for belief to cause us to be blind to the hurting or deaf to the cries of anguish of those who are in pain? As a person who holds beliefs in general with great care, I take warning from this little story. Maybe stopping to listen to the weeping and hurting ones in our world would be a good way to seek out love that is trying to be born. Maybe, just for a moment or two, it would be a good thing to hold our beliefs in such a way that would allow us to see the pain that's right in front of our eyes. As humans, we have a tendency to want to look away from the dark or the uncomfortable things. I didn't like telling that story. I hated it, actually. We want to be positive and happy. Nobody wants to be known as a downer. We need encouragement and happy stories. Remember the Chicken Soup for the Soul series? It was such a phenomenon. I feel like everyone had one on in their bathroom or on their bedside table. I feel like there were probably hundreds of different ones. Chicken soup for the teenage soul, chicken soup for the mother's heart, whatever. They all went on, and people loved them because you know what? We need to hear those stories. We need to hear uplifting and inspiring stories that remind us of the goodness of humanity. Stories of how maybe a stranger stopped to help someone, or how someone gave with such abandon that it changed someone's life. These are good stories, and love can be born in these stories. They absolutely can. We can become inspired to live with kindness and goodness when we hear the stories of how someone has done these good things. But the difficult places, the dark and ugly stories that we don't like to hear, they're trying to birth love too. They're crying out for change. And our hearts are designed to respond with compassion. As beings created in the image of God, we are wired to feel compassion and empathy when we hear someone crying or sharing their story of anguish. And this response of shared pain, the way that our face changes and reacts when someone tells us their vulnerable and difficult story, this instigates healing in the being of the person who has shared their hurt. It's scientifically proven. When I share my pain and you respond with empathy, chemicals are released in my brain that help me to process the hurt. That's amazing. That is powerful. The fact that we're created in God's image and that we are designed to respond, our natural response to hearing someone crying is compassion and empathy. That is being like God. So what is it that stops us from hearing the voices of the oppressed, of the hurting, of the weeping ones in our world? What keeps us from actually listening to those who are telling us, hey, I'm hurting here? I think it's fear. We're afraid we might be tempted to let go of our beliefs. Maybe we're even afraid we might be contaminated by the choices of the hurting ones. So we put up walls that are built by fear. Last week, Graham talked about making choices based on fear. Always a bad idea. This is a classic example. Fear causes us to turn away from our naturally designed compassion response. We run the other way so that we don't get hurt too. Our response comes from fear instead of from love. And this all sounds inspiring and challenging, but maybe you're wondering, is this really what the text is saying? Like, you took a little verse and then you went off on this tangent. Is that really what this text is about? So whenever I explore a passage, like the one we read in John 15, and I come to this question, why? Why is this here? Why is it that Jesus called his disciples friends? And what is he trying to tell us and them by commanding them to love one another? Whenever I do that and I come to this question, why, I know I have to go backwards. I go backwards through the text to see if I can just catch the trajectory that brought me to the verse that I'm struggling with. So we're going to do that. Let's look one chapter back to John chapter 14. We're going to read verses 8 to 11. Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Don't you believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves." So here Jesus is telling them that he is in the Father, and the Father is in him. It very nicely leads into chapter 15, the early part of chapter 15 that we didn't read, where he tells them, I am the vine and you are the branches. Remain in me. If you remain in me and I remain in you, then you will bear much fruit. You know, Jesus is in the Father is in Jesus is in us, we are in him, all of this. But why? Why does Jesus want them to know so clearly and specifically that he is in the Father and the Father is in him? We believe it's true, but why? Why is it so essential that the disciples know this? Let's read a little more. A little further down in chapter 14, verses 28 to 31, Jesus says, "You heard me say, I am going away and I am coming back to you. If you loved me, you would be glad that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. I have told you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe. I will not say much more to you, for when it does, for the prince of this world is coming. He has no hold over me, but he comes so that the world may learn that I love the Father and do exactly what my Father has commanded me." Jesus continues here making a big deal of the Father. He really wants them to know just how much he trusts the Father, how much Jesus trusts God. There is something about this relationship with the Father that he seems to want them to understand. What was it that Jesus said about the Father in our original passage, the one that we read from John 15? He said, it's actually verse 15, he said, "I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything I learned from my Father, I have made known to you." Everything I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. What's that thing that we learned in Sunday school from the Epistle of John, from John 1? Oh yeah, God is love. Yes, that's the result of Jesus making us friends instead of just servants. He says he's taught us everything he learned from the Father, from God, from love. Everything that Jesus learned from love, he is teaching us. This love, this Father that is in Jesus and in us, changes us. The love of the Father, the very one who was sending Jesus to the cross, this love doesn't look the other way. It hurts with the hurting. The compassion and the empathy of the Creator of the whole world wants to be born in us. In chapter 15, Jesus invites us to be hurt by what hurts God. That's entirely too much pain for me. You know, it's too much pain for you. Let me suggest that we're all being invited to become the friends of God, to collectively share this burden of hurting alongside God, to collectively share this honor of being friends with God. You know, it sounds so lovely when we put it that way. It sounds inspiring, like those chicken soup books. We know, though, that the cross isn't lovely. It doesn't look inspiring or heartwarming. It looks ugly. It looks messy. It looks like pain. And what we can see in the passages that we just read, that it was the Father who chose the cross. Jesus wasn't saying that to say, oh, I don't want it, but just the Father. But he was saying, no, it is the Father who chose this. I am following, I am obeying him, I am doing what he asked of me. It was the Father that chose the cross, but why? You know, there's so many answers to that question. It makes me stop and think, you know, couldn't Jesus have just stayed and continued teaching and loving and being the amazing human that he was? Yeah, that would have been great. Except it was the Father who chose the cross, and Jesus was obedient to the Father. You know, why Jesus went to the cross, there's so many answers to that question. Many. And finding and appreciating all the facets of that question, why Jesus went to the cross, that is the greatest privilege of being a Christian. That is my lifelong joy, to discover all the many reasons why God chose the cross. There is not just one answer, but you know, one of the reasons, a very important reason, we can find by looking just one more chapter back. So we go back one more chapter to John 13, and in John 13 we have a story of when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Right here at the end of Jesus' ministry, when the disciples would have been most certain, most sure that he was indeed the Son of God, Jesus bends low, taking their feet in his hands, and with no concern of being contaminated by their filth, Jesus touches their dirty feet. Let's read it. John chapter 13, verses 12 to 16. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. You know, this is why it was so critical that the disciples understand and know that Jesus and the Father were one, that Jesus was acting at the command of the Father. It was Jesus, but it was also God himself, the God that they had learned to fear from their childhood, the God whose name they wouldn't even speak out loud. It was this God. This is who went to the cross, kneeling down from heaven, taking our filth in his hands. He turned toward the ugliness that is so prevalent in our world, and instead of keeping himself clean, he died on the cross. In all this, God sent a message about the power of evil. The power of evil was no match for the power of love. Here in chapter 13, Jesus' actions foreshadow the cross, and he commands the disciples to do this for one another, and he commands us to do this for one another. So what does love say? Run, love says. Run toward the sound of weeping and grief. Hurry close to the ones who cry out in anguish. Don't be afraid of becoming contaminated by the filth. Of course you will. But my love is enough. The prince of this world has no hold over me. Everywhere and all around you, I am being born. Find me. Listen to the cries of the ones who herald my birth. Turn toward the pain instead of away from it. This is how you will be the friends of God. This Christmas, friends, may you be like Mary, who did not turn away from being seen as a disobedient sinner, but instead agreeing to take on the pain of birth. She said to the angel, "Let it be to me as you have said." Amen.